you were talking about maybe it's an interesting thing to pivot to, because there's a conversation that part of our conversation last week was about compression, about finishing, because a lot of people who are young mixers, producers, being like, wait, he hates compression, he doesn't use compression, he like, and I got probably 7 or 8 messages specifically like, wait, what does he mean when he says he doesn't compress? And if I can explain it, and then you please elaborate and correct me, you are doing a very specific, as we've talked about, a finishing part of the process. So you are getting vocals, drums, all these other things as oftentimes as stems that are compressed and EQ'd and all that kind of stuff. And obviously vocals generally are compressed. You're getting lots and lots of compression before it reaches you. And therefore you are taking it upon yourself to try to add something different. How do you think about that?
Well, maybe, right? Maybe. If the stem is there and it's given to me, I don't know what was done to it. I don't ask what was done to it. I can hear if there was compression on it. Yeah, I think there's two topics in what you're saying.
Yep.
Yes, I don't reach for a compressor first. So if we're going to talk about compression, I would first like to, and you can step in here as the every producer, the every mixer in response to this, but I would ask, why are you compressing, right? So people are saying, wow, he doesn't, why doesn't he? I'd like to ask, why do you?
Well, I just learned that that's what you do. That's part of it. Right. And certainly the sound of like distressors on drums, or an 1176 on a vocal, or an LA2A on acoustic guitar, these sort of things I associate with a certain kind of sound that's in recording history. Yeah, Tyler says there to make it louder, to even out dynamics.
But exactly, that's misinformation. That is not how to make it louder. To make it louder, you turn the gain up, right? It's simple. So the output of the compressor makes it louder. The input makes it quieter, right?
It makes it appear louder.
Sure.
Like compression.
It can. It can also make it appear smaller.
Yep, absolutely.
And my feeling is, with poor monitoring, and you go too far, 9 times out of 10, you're making the sound smaller. So I'm having the opposite reaction to people's compression, where I'm hearing it sound smaller most of the time. And that's how Tony taught me to be more sensitive to compression. And then it wasn't until I got good speakers and a good monitoring setup that I was able to even hear the difference, or be in a good room that made me say, oh, wait, why did I do that? Right? We can go on about that. I mean, I also think that compression changes the feel of things. And why am I changing the feel of the producer's hi-hat pattern? You know, it was dialed in on their part. So why am I changing that? Can I enhance it in other ways? Yeah, sure. Maybe it needs to poke out more, but why am I going to shift to a compressor technique versus messing with the transients, right? We have new tools. So when you bring up the specifics in gear that you just said, like a distressor on drums, like, I don't know. I don't think about a tool that was used in the 90s as often. Like, I don't, I'm like, what's the new tool? Where are we moving towards? I just don't want to fuck with the producer's shit.
Well, and it's a really important point. And again, so people aren't confused by it, you were talking about in modern production, people are, when I send in a production, I'm mixing it. I'm compressing or limiting, or I'm EQing, I'm doing all the things creatively to make it sound a certain way. You are then tasked as the finisher mixer with refining that more. So oftentimes you're getting over compressed, creatively compressed. I mean,
creatively compressed.
Well, there's a lot of records when you listen to, whether it's hip hop or dance or rock or whatever, you hear lots of compression in the beats. In the, a hi-hat pattern will feel differently when you compress the drums as a drum bus quite a bit, because you get the release of the hats, like the kick drum hits and then the hats kind of come out after, and that actually changes the groove in a really interesting way. And so
it can.
You wouldn't add that as the point. Like, people will be doing that in their creative process, but you won't. You'll be very careful about adding it. I will say, I think I don't even know if this can be quantified in this way, but I think the thing that took me the longest to hear is compression. Compression is something that takes years and years of just doing it to really get a feel for. It's something that I think Eric Valentine is as good at as anybody. His ability to hear attack and release and distortion of like his Unfairchild, the Undertone Audio Unfairchild, which is an amazing box, which I know you have. So I assume you use.
That's
maybe
not
you
a
don't
compressor.
It's a saturation box because of all.
It's a saturation box. It's a limiter. It's not a compressor. It doesn't. I don't move the needle. If I do a parallel on my drum bus, which is often through that, the needle moves slightly. Maybe on the kick drum. It's not. That's not why I'm using it though, right? So that's why I say, why are you compressing? I just want to know why. And the answers that we're getting back, first of all, you said, Tyler texted, we're getting back kind of wrong answers. That's not what you do to make something louder. But I want to jump back to something you said when you're producing and you're doing a rough mix. I wrote this down. I want to ask you, when you send off a song to a mixer, what are your expectations from that mixer? Why is the song even getting mixed in the first place?
That's a very interesting question. I'd say half of the time. Well, so I've probably mixed, I would say, half of the things that I've produced.
Sure.
And that's from little records to big records to radio records to weird indie records, whatever. I'd say of the other 50% of stuff that I've sent off to mixers, I'd say most of that is because there's a mixer already attached to the project. That's the honest answer is that, or that, like with One Direction stuff, like Serban was the guy. So sure. I knew that. I knew when I was producing it was going to go to Serban. So I figured out my dialogue with him about how to set up the Pro Tools session and what to send him and all that.
Well, let's move aside from the why it had to get there.
Yeah.
What are the expectations?
So I was going to say, so the other ones, what I'm hoping for from a mixer is simply, for lack of a better term, to make it sound better, to do things that I couldn't achieve. I mean, part of, I feel like I've delivered great mixes, but I'm not a great consistent mixer in the way that someone like you or Manny or Serban or some of these guys that are really career mixers that do this every day specifically. I think I always feel like I'm running into messiness in my mix. I can't get the clarity, or I can't get the transients to hit, or when it's not as loud as other people's stuff, but yet when it is loud, I kill the dynamics. I think it's like an expertise that and an objective ear. I guess the objective ear and expertise.
But what if the record calls for the mixer to inject mystery and lack of clarity into it?
It's funny that the first time Serban mixed one of my songs, a Demi Lovato song years ago. And I was in Paris at the time on vacation, and it was the first time I had someone stream a mix to me too. So I was with him on the phone and listening on headphones. Through streaming it through iTunes, I think at the time. Now we have the audio movers and other stuff. Yeah. And I remember there was a moment where there was so much compression or saturation or whatever on the track that the vocal on a downbeat like came back a little bit, and I was like, and I told him, I was like, can you automate that vocal up so I can really hear the word clearly? And he said, I can do that, and let me play it for you, but there may be something about that moment feeling a little more chaotic and less clear that will make it feel more exciting and more emotional. I don't know if he said it that way. That's how I read it from him when he explained it. This is years ago. But it was a really interesting point that he had a perspective on it that was different than mine, and that in and of itself was important to get another trusted ear. That's why to collaborate generally is to get other people's perspective. But someone who's has an ear like yours or like Serban's or one of these great mixers, it's really about them making decisions and suggesting things that I wouldn't have done otherwise.
Right. So on that note, kind of thinking about going back to the collaborative process in their team, and you kind of pass this off to this mysterious mixer that you're not really in a complete open dialogue with. If I make a move and someone says, hey, that thing you did, I don't like it. It's like, okay, can I talk to you about why I did it? And then maybe we can come to a understanding of maybe there's a happy medium, maybe there's something that's telling a story that you don't like it now, but maybe with our collaboration and our minds joining together, we can take that idea a little further, because you are the producer and you do have a vision for this. But maybe I could have sparked something, right? And when you're working collaboratively with someone, say it's in the room, and you start down a path, and there's a glimpse of hope at the end of the tunnel, you're both going to join in and try to get it there. When you're alone, you're second guessing. I don't want to change it. There's demoitis, which we should have a whole hour talk about what demoitis even is. It's a complete disease.
We could talk for hours and hours about that. We probably will. Yeah.
I think it's really relevant to the conversation. That's why I asked you, when you're sending something off, and maybe you think it needs to get mixed, does the whole team think it needs to be mixed? What do they think the mix is? A mixer is thought to do compression and EQ and leveling.
And yet we hear now that you don't even compress.
I very rarely change anybody's levels. I very rarely compress. And I EQ very, very deliberately. So
I have to ask you the obvious question. Then what do you do?
Exactly. I don't know. I should probably quit and just start cooking food all the time.
I mean, I'm down. Invite me over.
No, I think what I do is I don't think about what I do. So I actually don't have a good answer for this. And maybe this is something that I need to sit on. But I think I add an emotional depth to records. I think I try to make it a bit more tangible. Like you can reach into the speakers or make the speakers disappear and you can jump into the song. I think that carving out certain areas and certain frequencies of certain instruments make you able to feel the transients a bit more. And again, tangibility. I want to be able to feel the groove. So not to say that the rough mix didn't feel that way, but rough mixes tend to be thrown together, flattened like this. And I'm trying to just back it off a tiny bit so there's room for it to do this, to be kind of more visible.
It's interesting because the way you're talking about it is almost how I used to look at mastering, which is like, hey, I'm gonna add some things to this, or subtract some things, or do the right kind of dynamic touch. But you're doing that in a much more in-depth way with the individual stems and
because in a mastering realm, there's not enough headroom at this point on most mixes to do that more broad. Like, this is how it's delivered to me. We're kind of medium dark, and we want to be brighter, and we can make it feel active, and the transients poke and mastering. I think we have to do that really, really refined now to get records, again, like last week discussing loudness, to not be numerically loud so they don't get turned down in a normalization algorithm, but also feel loud. Right?
Density, like you're talking about.
The density, sonic density and arrangement sparseness, right? So going back to God's plan, right? The arrangement is so sparse, but it feels dense because all that low end is so round and it feels wide. It's a mono bass, right? It's not a wide bass, but it feels wide because there's so much real estate down there. That's not. No, I'm not analog summing. I'm digital. Just going to answer that question.
Good. Yeah.